was unanimous for Republicans that were there. Nevertheless, when it actually came to the fast-track authority, there were 5 Republicans who stood up against this. And that was Rand Paul, Pete Sessions, both of whom had actually looked at the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Most others hadn't. Also, Mike Lee stood against that, and 2 others stood against the leadership and stood against the fast-track authority. And of course, the fast-track authority that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, people who are running for president, the fast-track authority that they signed onto essentially lies to us, telling us that this is not a treaty. And we know full well that it is a treaty. By definition, it is a treaty. It's an agreement over commerce between one or more nations. That is a treaty. But they lie to us. They tell us that it is a trade agreement. They tell us that it is a partnership so they can get it through the Senate without the required 67 votes. So when you see a senator who signed onto this, understand that they have betrayed you at a fundamental level, even before you see what's in these secretly negotiated trade agreements. But if you think the senators sold out cheap, the trade representative, the key trade representative, held out for a lot more. This is an article from Liberty Blitzkrieg, and they say how Obama's top trade representative, Michael Froman, received millions from Citigroup during the financial crisis. And of course, he's being paid very well by the people who are lobbying for this. In a press release, groups that are opposed to the TPP and the TTIP highlighted the links between Citigroup, which has lobbied extensively on those, and the fast-track authority, and with Michael Froman, who is the U.S. trade representative, who is negotiating. He's taken the lead in these secret negotiations with the 400 or so corporate lobbyists that we're not allowed to see because you and I, the American public, we're not stakeholders anymore. These people own everything. They are the stakeholders. They say he received more than $4 million and a golden parachute from Citigroup upon leaving the large financial institution to join the Obama administration in 2009 and began these trade negotiations. They say no one is pushing harder to pass the multinational corporate giveaway masquerading as free trade known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, than Obama's top trade representative, Michael Froman. This is what the New York Times points out. They say he previously worked for Citigroup, one of the largest recipients of taxpayer bailout money. See, that's why we're saying this is not free trade. This is crony capitalism. This is written by the same banks and the same big corporations that benefited from the bailouts, especially the banks. This is a guy who got millions as part of that bailout, and now he is doing it again. And that's precisely what is going on with this. This is nothing but crony capitalism for the benefit of a few, selling your jobs, exporting your jobs, and importing workers. They say, noting deep ties between the country's top trade negotiator and Wall Street banks, 10 groups that represent millions of Americans are calling on the White House to make public all communications between the U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman and the massive financial institutions that stand to benefit from proposed trade deals. Well, good luck with that. We can't get the emails of Hillary Clinton. We can't see what the IRS is doing to people. We can't see the trade agreement. We can certainly ask and we can point out that this is something that is being done in secret, but I don't think we're going to see the secretive emails between the trade representative, former Citigroup official who got millions after the bank bailouts. Now, next week, we're going to have the beginning of the Bilderberg meeting. If you want to talk about people who are planning the economic downfall of the West, go to the Bilderberg meeting and see who is in attendance there. And of course, we do that every year. This year, we're going to have Paul Joseph Watson again. Rob Dew will be going, as will Josh Owens. That will be next week. And to give you an idea and some background on that, let's take a look at this report from John Bound.
I continue to be much more concerned when it comes to our security with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan.
The Bilderberg Group will coalesce June 9th through the 14th in the Austrian mountains at the Inner Alpen Hotel. How many of these instigators of widespread tyranny will be discussing their million-dollar safe bunkers between meetings as they hide like moles while their hellish plans are unleashed on the gullible masses?
It's called a panic room.
What?
A safe room. Castle keep in medieval times. Poured concrete walls, buried phone line not connected to the house's main line. You have your own ventilation system and a bank of surveillance monitors that covers nearly every corner of the house.
What's to keep someone from prying open the door?
Steel. Very thick steel.
A A decade ago, safe rooms would only have been of interest to A-list celebrities who wanted to protect against stalkers, but they are now becoming popular with elites who wish to guard against potential civil unrest, which could cause crime rates to skyrocket in the aftermath of an economic collapse. According to a New York Times report, the typically 8 feet by 12 feet bulletproof rooms are an increasingly sought-after means of the elite feeling protected, just as moats and armies protected them in centuries past. Wealthy individuals, including foreigners who are more familiar with such stringent security measures, are having safe rooms installed to protect their personal possessions, as well as their own physical safety, against potential domestic disorder that could arise out of sudden economic collapse.
This huge disparity is not because of some flaw in capitalism or because of the Reagan tax cuts or even the greed of Wall Street. The problem is central banks that are out of control, printing money like no one ever imagined, and have created a massive worldwide financial inflation. And when you have a financial inflation, the people that own the stocks and the bonds get the windfall.
After 9/11, he got requests for 1 or 2 safe rooms a year, but that number has recently jumped to more than 20 rooms annually.
Probably do about 25 this year, did about 21, 22 last year, but we're looking at possibly going up to maybe 30 the following year, so we just see an increase every year.
The notion that the elite are making preparations for mass civil disorder is no conspiracy theory. Fearing global unrest and the possibility of another major conflict, many members of the elite have been buying remote property and land in places like New Zealand.
A lot of very wealthy and powerful people are quite afraid right now. They see us on an unstable trajectory. They don't see our political institutions being what you might call representative, responsive, and pulling things together. Things are getting more and more dangerous as, say, Ferguson, Missouri brings to bear.
Ironically, Johnson is president of the Institute of New Economic Thinking, an organization founded and bankrolled by billionaire George Soros, who himself is funding the very same movement aggravating the civil unrest, the Black Lives Matter movement.
These 2 men, Frederick Young and Philando Hunter, were sentenced on this day to life in prison without parole for robbing, torturing, murdering the 2 teens who had been in Detroit trying to buy drugs.
I'd like to say sorry to the families of Ayanna Jones, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and I want to apologize to them for not being able to get justice for their loved ones who was murdered in cold blood. And in respect for the peaceful protests, I want to say hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter.
The risk of domestic disorder is also heightened by the fact that distrust in government and leadership in the United States and other Western countries continues to remain near historic lows. Corruption, social alienation, and lack of community, all of which were contributing factors to the 2011 London riots, are all creating a powder keg situation that could blow at any moment. The United States government's inability to fund social programs could also lead to the seizure of private pension funds.
The euro, the creation of the euro, was all about not creating a strong Europe, but it was, because he's not European, he's Canadian American. It was about making sure that each nation would no longer have control of its own fiscal fate, that they would be stuck competing against each other by reducing services and provided by the government. So that you keep cheapening your workforce. And he was very blunt about it. He said that's the purpose of it. It's not to make Europe stronger. It's to make the nations within Europe impotent. And that was his philosophy. So.
And that's the same thing with NAFTA and GATT. Ross Perot was right. The race to the bottom, and we got the SPP, North American Union documents 3 years ago when Judicial Watch sued and got them. And they said they had all these corporate chiefs there at the governmental meeting telling the Secretary of State of Mexico, Canada, and the United States what to do. And they said, we're going to lower the U.S. and Canada to the level of Mexico, just as we've done with the euro, so there's nowhere to run, nowhere to compete, and now we're going to play nations off against each other all over the world, Asia, European Union, North American Union, to basically get all the tax money for bankers as bailouts and take people's pension funds. And now we see Bloomberg reporting that federal regulators are preparing to take at least half of people's pensions in the U.S.
As real wages drop, it will also become increasingly harder to pacify younger generations via consumer culture. Lifestyles built around the acquisition of products will become harder to maintain as the economic environment worsens. These factors, when combined with further police brutality and a growing sense of injustice, almost guarantee to cause more civil unrest over the next 2 years, fulfilling economist Martin Armstrong's prediction that a serious political uprising will erupt by 2016 in the United States. John Bound for INFOWARS.com.